tell you, the apple, whatever the apple thing is, I know it's okay, but she wouldn't let me take the other thing. In case you didn't notice today, if you sit in the fourth row on that side, you have to be up front. Good thing I didn't do the third row, Seth. You've been up here preaching. If your last name is Couch or you sit in that row, you have to come up here and do something. Yeah, Kurt's gone. Probably wishes he was back in the air conditioning right now, getting out in that heat. I told Terry I was going to do a little commercial this morning. You can't even, doesn't matter if you subscribe to these websites or other things, they still stick commercials in there anymore. I used to think if we didn't watch TV, I wouldn't have to worry about commercials, but you can't do anything without commercials. So I'm going to do a commercial this morning. We're going to turn to the book of Hebrews. I'm going to share some thoughts with you from Hebrews 12. So the commercial is, if you want to know more about the book of Hebrews, Wednesday nights, we just began a study on the book of Hebrews. So we just did the first 4 verses of chapter 1 last Wednesday. So if you want to know more about the book of Hebrews, the commercial is, come Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. Or if you come a little bit early, you can sing with the kids. And then we dive into the book of Hebrews. Now, I should sing a little jingle to you. Art heard me saying, so don't worry, I'm not going to put you through that. But if you want to dive into the book of Hebrews, we've already had some discussion over who wrote it. And David and I don't see eye to eye. So don't worry, one of us is right.
Maybe not.
You might be surprised.
It could even be Luke. I could be different on it.
See, you see sort of what happens on Wednesday nights now, so that's part of the commercial. But I do want to dive into Hebrews chapter 12. And Jeremiah and I did not discuss what we were looking at today. So it's either a coincidence or the hand of God that we're talking about seeing God at the end of life. Because I want to share with you some thoughts about preparing for the presence of God. And Jeremiah's already talked about our resurrection, the resurrected Jesus, and how important the resurrection is. So we're going to turn to Hebrews chapter 12, and we're going to look at verses 12 to 17. But I want to draw the primary thought out of verse 14, where the writer of Hebrews, see, that's how I get around David and I not getting into an argument this morning, or our doing it. The writer of Hebrews mentions in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, without holiness, no one will see God. I don't know if that makes you nervous at all or not. Without holiness. So if you and I are going to see God, guess what? We have to be holy. I don't know, is that an adverb or an adjective? John, is that an adjective? Holiness?
Yes.
Okay. I never did very good in English. I ain't no English teacher. Okay? Holiness. That adjective. Would that be used to describe anybody sitting here today? I mean, if you looked around, would you say, well, that's a holy person. That's a holy person. Would you look at yourself and say, I'm a holy person? I've heard people talk about cows and say, holy cow. I didn't know cows were holy, but I've heard that. But the writer of Hebrews is very clear here. Without holiness, no one is going to see God. Does that leave us in a bad spot? Maybe we would consider a bad day when we find out only the holy people will see God. We're going to dive into that a little bit more because I just want to share some thoughts about preparing for the presence of God. I heard a minister once say that this life, our physical life, is preparation for eternity. That will be a lot longer than I live. Even though some days I feel like I'm getting really old, eternity is going to be a lot longer than the days I've had on earth. Life is preparation for eternity. Without holiness, no one will see God. That kind of puts us in a bad spot, doesn't it? I don't believe it does. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Preparing for the presence of God. Years ago, way back in the last century, when we were in Ghana, I made a trip to a place called Samrabor. I don't know if you ever got there, David. Okay, did they ever fix the road? Well, you know, I've never been necessarily treated like somebody who was really, really, really important. You know, the kind of thing where you go out of the way to really clean the house if somebody important is coming. Not just slide stuff in the closet, but really clean the house. Or be one of those people for which they roll out the red carpet. Or maybe they cater a meal. I've never really found myself to be that important. Except for one time. One of our students asked me to come out to his village in Samrabor, out in the western region. And it was about, I don't know, an 8 or 10 hour trip. Maybe longer. I don't remember. That was a long time ago. What I do remember about it is we had this Datsun pickup. And we were going way out into the boonies. It would have made Meg look like a metropolis. We went out there, and finally we got off the paved road, whatever was paved of it, and we got onto a gravel road. And we came to the end of the gravel road. There was not much left except some grass and some dirt. And I found out these were old logging roads. So we came up to a bridge, and a logging truck, I don't even know, that logging truck has a wider wheelbase than a little Datsun pickup, doesn't it? Well, when I got there, there was the frame of the bridge, and they had some 2x on each side for the logging truck. But I've got a Datsun truck. How are you going to get across that bridge? The bridge wasn't very long, maybe from here back to John. Wasn't that far. How are you going to get there? Because it's set for a logging truck. Well, a couple guys got out of the back of the truck. I had a truckload of people, about 10 or 12 of us. A couple guys got out, and they picked up those boards, and they moved them in. And I said, I'm supposed to drive across that? And one guy said, well, I'll be out front. I'll tell you if you need to go right or left. So we did. We made it. It was easier coming out because I knew what to expect. I wasn't quite so scared of, wow, if I get over too close to one side and this slides off, we're in a mess. However, we got across that. Drove a little bit farther, we came to this clearing and we stopped. Nothing around us except trees. I said, okay, what's happening now? And they said, oh, we gotta walk 2 miles to get back to the village. I don't mind the walk, it's just I didn't expect that we were going back in the middle of nowhere, but we were. So we started walking, and by the way, we had brought a generator. They wanted a generator, because somebody important was coming, that was me. They wanted to do it right, electric lights and everything. How do you get a generator 2 miles? Well, 2 guys grabbed it, picked it up and set it on the guy's head, and he carried it for 2 miles back that trail. Anyway, we started walking back, and I started hearing some screams and some cries and noise on the side of the path. And I asked Christopher, I said, what is that noise? He said, oh, it's kids. You know, everybody's come out to see the important guy who's coming, but he said, they've never seen a white man before. I said, oh, I've heard people scream and shout when they've seen me before too. I thought it was just because I was ugly. But for that 2 mile walk, I was the celebrity and they were all excited. We got to the village and they set up the generator so there would be electric light, although they went off about 9 o'clock. For 2 or 3 hours a night we had electricity. But they showed me to my room. And had a nice little cement floor. The walls had been finished with cement. Now, how do you get cement that far back in the middle of nowhere? Somebody put it on their head and carried it 2 miles. They prepared because somebody important was coming. They didn't know it was me, but they were preparing for my presence there. And that's the only time I think anybody's ever done that much work, just because I was showing up. But to them, I was somebody very, very important. It was an interesting experience. Don't plan to ever go back and visit again. By now, they probably fixed the roads. I don't know. But it's very, very interesting that just because I was the one who was coming, they went to all this effort and prepared. I was there 2 nights. And honestly, it really wasn't all that comfortable. would have rather been home. However, they felt that I was somebody important coming to visit them. And they prepared. They prepared. How do we prepare? What are we thinking about walking into the presence of God? Because someday, we're going to stand before Him, and God's going to open those books. Are we prepared? The writer of Hebrews says, without holiness, none of us are going to be there. And if we don't consider ourselves holy, we've got some thinking, some planning, some praying, and some work to do. So real quickly, I want to share some thoughts here. I want to begin by going back to the book of 1 Corinthians. Because if we are preparing for the presence of God, before we dive into what the writer of Hebrews says, we need to be prepared in the right relationship. And that is summarized for us in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. I'm just going to read verse 11 because I think it summarizes what we need to be, to do and be for having that right relationship with God. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 11. Now I know who wrote this one, Paul. Paul said, and that is what some of you were. Now if you want to know what he's talking about, look 2 or 3 verses above. He's talking about people who were wrongdoers, sexually immoral, idolaters, adulterers, men who had sex with men, thieves, greedy, drunkards, slanderers, swindlers. That's what he says. Some of you were that kind of person. In fact, most people that lived at that time were those kind of people. But Paul says that's what some of you were. But listen, but you were washed, you were sanctified, and you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So the first thing we want to do if we're preparing for the presence of God is we need to be in a right relationship with God. And if we've not been cleansed by Jesus, because Paul doesn't describe every sinful situation or circumstance that we could be in, but we could point to ourselves and say that, yes, there was sin in my life that separated me from God. And he said all of that has been taken care of by Jesus Christ. So that's the very beginning of preparing for the presence of God, is getting in the right relationship with God through His Son, Jesus Christ. If you haven't done that, today's a good day to stop preparing and start doing. What Paul was talking about is a spiritual separation. When you and I become a follower of Jesus Christ, when you and I are baptized into Him, God not only forgives our sins, but His Spirit comes to dwell in us. And that Spirit does something that you and I can't do. Not only does the blood of Jesus apply to our lives, but you and I are separated from the world. You know what that separation is called in the Bible? Holy. Holy. You and I are made holy by the blood of Jesus. Because holiness is really, all it really means is separation, set apart. That's what the word holy means. God is holy because He is set apart from His creation. He's not a created being. Holiness is not just about pure living. Holiness is about being in the right relationship with God. And it is that separation that makes us holy. So if you and I are not separated from sin, then we're not holy. So what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is becoming holy through the blood of Jesus. We are separate and set apart. Now there's another aspect of holiness. He talks about justification. He also talks about sanctification. That day by day living, how we live separate from sin day by day. And that's what Paul is talking about here in Hebrews chapter 4. All right, I let my cat out of the bag. I think Paul wrote Hebrews. David thinks Apollos wrote it. So. One of us is right, or as Deb says, neither one of us is right. But in the book of Hebrews, starting with verse 12, and we can turn back over to there now, because this is really what I want to take a look at. Hebrews chapter 12, not the separation in terms of existence, the holiness that comes through Jesus Christ that has set us apart by His blood. I want to talk about the holiness that comes from the daily living that you and I are involved in. Hebrews chapter 12, I'm going to begin with verse 12. Therefore, find some therefores. A lot of them in the book of Hebrews. And what it means is, because of this, this is what we're talking about. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what had been done. I'm looking around. Okay. Ladies, let me ask you, does your spouse clean up every time he comes into your presence? Does he put a little aftershave on? Does he bring you some chocolates? Does he say, hey, let's go out to eat tonight and have a nice time? Did he ever do that in your life? Was there ever a time when he tried to clean up a little bit, come see you, maybe take you out for the evening? Maybe try to get in good favor with you? I believe there was a time for most of us, or else you wouldn't be here together. You know, there was a time when us guys would prepare to go see the ladies. What happened? Oh, we got married. But there was a time when we were going to see that someone special. Sometimes I might even clean up my car a little bit. Throw a little bit of trash out. You know, it was really important. We prepared because we were going to see someone that was very important, special for us. And that's what Paul is talking about here when he's talking about things that we need to do and things that we need to avoid. First of all, and this part is a little more meaningful to me now. Strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. You know, going up steps isn't quite as painless as it used to be. Sometimes I can feel it in the knees. Actually, it's more going down than up. You can just kind of feel the knees be a little bit weaker. I was out tending to some multiflower rows last couple weeks. And you know those hills on the farm? They're hard on the knees going up and down. I found that out. The more you go up and down, the harder it seems to get on your knees. And so he's talking about strengthening, making level paths, not going up and down the hill, but going on the level paths. So first of all, what the writer is telling us to do is we got some things we need to pay attention to. One is we need to strengthen. We need to strengthen our lives. We need to strengthen our faith. We need to strengthen our relationship with God. We need to take a look at our journey, and that's what these terms are really taking a look at in verses 12 and 13. The journey that we make with God. We need to have a pathway that's straight. How do we make a level pathway? I mean, he's not saying have someone run the road grader or the dozer in front of you. He's saying you make your path straight. Well, there's two ways that can happen. One is we choose the right path. Choices, 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 choices. We choose the right path to go down. If there's a path that is straight and level and a path that's up and down, which one are we going to choose? The second is we may have to do a little bit of work. It might be a level path, but there might be some rocks in the way, or once in a while we may have to get a shovel out and do some work to level. If we do that, maybe someone who comes behind won't have such a difficult road problem. You see, what Paul is talking about here is making the decisions to go on the right path. You and I make those decisions every day in how we live our lives. We are making the path straight, or we're climbing up and down the hills. The decisions that you and I make about where we go, what we say, what we think, what we watch, those are all decisions about how straight our path is. We need to be encouragers and examples to other people. And that's what is being talked about here. So that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. The work that we do has an impact on other people. Preparing for the presence of God includes making the right choices and decisions about the areas of our life that we engage other people in. I don't know what one of those are in your life. I have no idea. But we need to pay attention to them. The bulk of what I want to share with you, though, is coming about the dangers. And these are dangers that we need to be aware of and avoid. Because if we want to be holy people and be ready for the presence of God, we have to pay attention to the things around us. First of all, he says in verse 15, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. Now, I think it's enough for me to try to see to it that I don't fall short of the grace of God, let alone worried about you. But Paul puts that responsibility on us as believers, not just for my relationship with God, but encouraging others in their relationship with God. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. How can you fall short of the grace of God? A lot of times, we wait, and we wait, and we wait. We say our society is not a very patient society. We don't like to wait for things. However, there are some things that we wait for that we shouldn't wait for. We wait on our relationship with God. Well, down the road, I'll work on my relationship with God. I'll wait till a better time. I'll wait till things settle down. I'll wait till I get older and then want to do something about my relationship with God. If we wait and wait and wait, sometimes we will miss the opportunities that God gives us to live in His grace every day. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. How do we do that? Well, the writer of Hebrews also talks about encouraging one another back in chapter 10. See to it that you encourage one another and that you gather and you assemble to worship and encourage one another. I would encourage you to think about that. There's some Sundays when I don't want to show up to church. But I learned a long time ago that sometimes being in church is not about me, it's being about other people who see us and share with us and are encouraged by our presence. So when we feel like, well, it's just one of those days I'm not going to go, not only are we harming ourselves, we also take away some encouragement for other people. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. This next phrase in verse 15, how does it fit here? And that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. You know what I found on the farm? Well, Jeremiah found it first, then I found some somewhere else. Never expected to see it. Poison hemlock. Those little triangle growths look nice. They'll kill you. Poison hemlock. Probably means nothing to most of you, but not good for cows either. It can kill them as well if they eat a lot of it. So, thankfully, I got some stuff to spray on them when they died. At least I hope they don't pop back up. A bitter root. This is a reference back to the book of Deuteronomy, and if you want to turn there, it's in chapter, I think 28, verse 19. When Moses talked to the people of Israel, and he said, don't do this, because when you do this, you become a bitter root to the nation of Israel. What he meant by that is they eat roots. We eat roots. How would you like to bite into a nice big bite of mashed potatoes and have it taste bitter, nasty? Well, that might happen if you take rotten potatoes and try to make mashed potatoes out of it. If you get a root that's bitter, and they would eat them, they would use them in cooking, it ruins the whole thing. Sometimes it could kill you. Back in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses was saying, don't do this because it becomes a bitter root to the people of Israel. And what he was talking about was worshiping other gods. Don't chase after the gods of these nations that you that past you. Don't chase after the gods of the nations that you've conquered, because it becomes a bitter root to the whole nation. What he's really saying wasn't not just chasing other gods. He was saying, don't take your focus away from our God. It's our God that brought us out of Egypt. It's our God who cared for us. It's our God who's giving us this land. Don't take your focus from him. Don't bring a substitute for God and expect that substitute to do for you what God has done for you. Now, all we have to do is take about 2 seconds and reflect on our culture today, and we've got bitterness all over the place. And that bitterness is just oozing out. Well, it's not just oozing out, it's almost gushing out of our culture. That bitterness that has taken us, that is a result of taking our focus off of God. When we turn away from God and focus on other things, we become a very bitter people. And it affects not only us, it affects those around us. Verse 16. All it's going to take is a couple seconds. We just read about 4 words. See to it that no one is sexually immoral or is godless. Now we'll pick up his example in a minute. See to it that no one is sexually immoral or godless. That's part of what Moses was talking about in the book of Deuteronomy. That bitter root that creeps into the life of the nation and it just becomes a cycle. It continues removing the focus of God, and it gets bitter, and people search and they want something else, and they keep looking and looking and looking for other things instead of turning back to God. If you know anything about the Old Testament, you know that the nation of Israel got themselves into a cycle where they would turn away from God, and God would bring judgment and punishment upon them, and they would turn back to God and beg him to help them find peace and freedom, and he would bring a leader to them who would do that. And once God had blessed them, they would turn away from God. That's a challenge for each of God's people every day as we live. Otherwise, it wouldn't be mentioned here to encourage us. See to it that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau. See to it that no one is substituting another focus other than God. One of the biggest challenges that he's referring to in verses 16 and 17 has to do with living for today. Living for today. He talked about Esau. Remember that story in the Old Testament? It's in Genesis around chapter 25, I think. Jacob and Esau, when they were born, Esau came out first, and Jacob had a hold of his heel. And so a prophecy was that Jacob would overpower Esau. I'm sure that wasn't in Esau's mind that day when he came in from hunting and he was hungry. You know, the kind of hunger that comes from going without a meal for one or two times. You know, you're really hungry. I think it probably may have been longer for him. He was out hunting. Evidently he wasn't very successful. He came back and Jacob had a nice pot of stew. The first thing that concerns me about that is that Jacob prepared the stew. Why didn't his mother prepare the stew for him? She could cook. She did later. At any rate, the point was that Jacob had prepared food. Esau came in and was hungry, and Jacob had a plan in mind. In fact, I think he had quite a plan in mind, because I think his cooking the stew where Esau would come in was probably part of that plan. But Esau was hungry, and he said, give me some of that. And Jacob said, I will give it to you if you give me your birthright. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot to us. But to Jacob and Esau, it didn't mean a whole lot to Esau at the time. It did to Jacob. That he would become the head of the family when their father died. That he would inherit that, not only that responsibility, but all the access to all the perks that went with that position would be his. Esau didn't care. He said, hey, what good's that to me if I'm dead? You'll get it anyway. Now, that's just my paraphrase. But he ate the food. I think he got some lentil soup and some bread, and for that he gave up his privilege of being the firstborn son. He gave it to his brother. And that's what the writer is referring to here at this time. Esau, for a single meal, sold his inheritance as the oldest son. There's two things around that I want to share with you. Number one is he was just living for today. All he's looking for. How do we prepare for the presence of God if we're living for today and today only? the possibility is there that we might do some things that we don't care. We don't care. What does it matter if I do this because I won't be here tomorrow anyway? And quite honestly, I believe that's one of the challenges we see in our culture, especially among young people. They don't care. Today's the only thing that's important to them, and whatever it is that I just saw on my phone, that's what's important to me right now. It doesn't matter that if I do this, there may be a consequence. It doesn't matter that if I do this, I'm not prepared for the next step. I used to think, well, that was just a lot of talk. But it surprised me, I don't know, it's been probably a couple of years ago, when everybody was trying to find work. We'd have people who we would schedule a job interview for them. And they tended to be younger people. By younger people, I mean, 40 or younger. Okay? Schedule a job interview. 10 o'clock, you're supposed to come in for an interview. Sometimes they were virtual. Never hear a thing. You've probably been through that, haven't you? Then what really surprised me was when a couple of them have applied for another job. You just didn't show up for an interview, and now you're applying for another job with us? You think we're really that stupid? Well, they do. But the attitude of that generation is, it doesn't matter. I can go out and find another job. Or, it was really important. My dog needed its toenails clipped today, so I didn't come to your interview. But I'll come tomorrow. No, you won't. You learn something about people that way. Just thinking about today. Thinking about today, and if I do something and it dishonors God, that won't matter because I can fix it tomorrow, or maybe I can do something about it later, but this is important to me right now. If we don't think about the future, if it's not into our minds, if all we're out chasing after is today, we're not preparing for the presence of God because it's coming. We will stand before God. But if all we think about is today, then we're not preparing for the future. Nothing is sacred. For Esau, that which was most important to his culture meant nothing to him. A bowl of lentil soup and some bread. Now, it might have been good soup, but I don't think it was that good. Because if you look at verse 17, this is the point we really need to draw from this. If we're talking about without holiness, no one will see God. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. You have to go back to Genesis and read how Jacob deceived his own father with the help of his mother. And then Esau gave that blessing to Jacob. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. Think about that phrase in line with verse 14. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. Our culture, and I believe the church even, thinks that we can fix everything. Thinks that God will adjust or forgive. Esau couldn't change what he had done, even though he begged his father and he shed tears. He couldn't change it. He couldn't change it. The finality of some choices that we make go with us for the rest of our lives. Some choices and decisions that we make will either haunt us or strengthen us for the rest of our lives. God can forgive. God can forgive the sin. He very rarely takes away the consequences of the sin. You and I will live with those things. So if we're not preparing for the presence of God, think about that. If we're not preparing in this life for all eternity, and that time comes when we're called home, even though we shed tears, we cannot change what we've done. Without holiness, no one will see God. Are we prepared for the presence of God? Have we entered into that relationship through Jesus Christ and his blood? Are we living that relationship day by day? Are we walking in God's ways rather than our ways? Is our focus on God rather than upon all the things around us? Are we thinking, even thinking about tomorrow, as opposed to just living for today? Because there are some choices that you and I will make that will never, ever be able to change. I could go down a long list, but then we never get done here. I could name a lot of things that I wish I'd done different. I could name a lot of things that consequences have lasted a long time. Can you? If your relationship with Jesus Christ is not what it should be, start with. We're going to sing a hymn of invitation, and we invite you to begin that relationship in the right way with God. If you think about those words and you wonder about your holiness, this is a good day to make that decision, to ask God to guide you to be a holy person. I'll ask Terry to come.